Hi, guys, and welcome to the Android and Me podcast. I am Nick Gray, and we are back for another week to talk about Android news and all the latest information that's been coming out over the last 2 weeks. This is actually the second time that we've gone a couple weeks without a podcast. Schedules just have not been jiving between us, and so we're back after 1 week off. And we have Dustin and Dima, our regular crew. How are you guys doing?
Good.
I'm doing well, thank you.
So I was saying before we started that I have been completely out of the mix. If you've been watching the site and reading the site, you'll notice that I have maybe 3 posts for the entire month. It sucks when your real job keeps you busy and you simply don't have time for staying up with the news, unfortunately. So I'm going to be relying on you guys to keep this podcast alive. So
I'll try my best.
So with that being said, if you guys can keep me updated on what was the biggest news over the last 2 weeks, because I'm completely clueless.
So going back let's see, when was the exact date? The 13th. So about a week ago now, actually exactly a week ago now, Motorola officially announced the Moto E and an updated version of the Moto G. And both of those phones are something we've been talking about a lot, even when we, on our few and far between podcasts lately, they still get a lot of mentions. But so the Moto E came out. It is $130 in the U.S., which you can get on Amazon, tax and shipping free for most places, so it's just a straight $130. And it has a 4.3-inch 960 by 540 display, which is 256 ppi, so it's not terrible. It has a 1.2 gigahertz dual-core Snapdragon 200, and that's paired with an Adreno 302. It's got 1 gig of RAM, 4 gigs of storage that is expandable with micro SD slot, 5 megapixel camera, and it only has 3G. And it is splash proof and scratch resistant, whatever that means. I think that just means that there's a Gorilla Glass display. And then for $220 at the same event, which the events, if just in case you were anybody who was up and around for these events last week knows that they were really, really bad, because Motorola India did an event, and then like 20 minutes later, or half an hour later, Motorola did one in London, they were advertising that as like the official event. So it was kind of like they announced the products twice, and information was really hard to come by when they announced them the first time, because it was kind of like, well, I don't know if this information is going to be for India only, but of course it's all sorted out now. And anyway, so the other phone they released was an updated version of the Moto G for $220 that only has 8 gigs of storage, but it has universal LTE, so theoretically it'll work just about anywhere. You can stick a SIM card in, and it has 8 gigs of storage. It also has a micro SD card slot now, and it comes in white. So, and that's about it. That was like the biggest news, I think, out of the last 2 weeks for real products, anyway.
One little comment: I believe that the 5 megapixel camera is in the Moto E is in fact fixed focus, and
Yes.
I have not used one of those since the Veer.
Yeah. So it's pretty, with the Moto G, it was kind of like you get what you pay for, and it was, like we were all really surprised at what you did get when you paid that little. With the Moto E, it's like, wow. It is $130, but the difference between the Moto E and I think it's the $180 Moto G, the $50 difference is, for my money, every time I would recommend save the $50 and get the G every time. I think there's very few instances in which I would recommend somebody getting a Moto E over a Moto G.
I think the Moto E was never meant for the U.S. market. The Moto E is just useless for us if we can get a Moto G, because Moto X to Moto G, there's a big difference in money. Moto G to Moto E, very small difference. For most of America, I would assume Moto G would be viable if the Moto E was. So I think the Moto E was more for developing markets, but it's still a decent phone. I mean, it's nothing bad about it, but I couldn't recommend it as a good Android experience.
It's a decent phone, but this is where I have issues with Dustin's recommendation of save the $50. In that instance, if people actually thought like that, there'd be no market for free phones on contract or $100 phones on contract. Everybody would be saving that, $50 or $100 and buying the $200 phone on contract. But we see they sell millions and millions of these phones for free. I mean, every time there's a new iPhone released, Apple comes back and says, hey, this was a good selling phone, but then they kind of try to hide under the rug that the old phone, because it was $100 less, outsold the new phone. So it's things like price is always one of the most important factors in all these things. And while $50 may not seem huge in the grand scheme of things, there's a big difference between percentage-wise, there's a massive difference between $130 and $180. We're talking about 35 or a 30% price difference there. So if someone told you, you can buy this phone for $600 or buy this phone for $800 or $900, that's a 30% price difference. I mean, it's just multiplied exponentially.
Don't forget that we recommend the Moto G specifically because it's a better experience. Though most people might not choose it, we beg them to choose it. Because if you buy the Moto E, you might just be disappointed. The Moto G is definitely not disappointing. It's much closer to a flagship phone than the Moto E is. It's a pretty big difference.
So, it's also worth noting real quick that if you did a direct translation of the price from how much was going to be sold in India to the U.S., we all assumed it was going to be, I think it was 109. So there is a little bit, so it's a little bit cheaper in India than even if you were to just directly convert $130 over. It's still a little bit cheaper, and it is also important to figure in if you do not have secure constant data connection for things like music and videos, in order to go from a Moto E, which has expandable storage, to a Moto G, which has expandable storage, there is a $90 price difference in the U.S.
Yep. And so looking back at phones from 3 years ago, we have the HTC Sensation, which has essentially the same specs as what the Moto E has. It has a QHD display, 4 gigs internal storage, expandable card. The Sensation had, I think, was a 5-megapixel camera.
But autofocus.
It did have autofocus, VGA front-facing camera, 1080p video capture.
HSPA Plus.
Yeah. But it was a flagship phone 3 years ago. So I was just looking now, and while it would be running an old version of Android, you can buy a new one, a new HTC Sensation for $140. Or you can get
one thing,
or you can get the Sensation XE with the Beats audio headphones for $175, and those headphones are priced at $100.
Don't forget one thing, though. That old version of Android is going to make the biggest difference.
It's horrendous.
I'm not talking about it in terms of a negative way. I'm talking about a positive way. That old version of Android is going to run a hell of a lot better than KitKat is on the Moto E.
I don't think so. I mean,
I think so. From the reviews I've read of the Moto E, it's actually pretty damn laggy.
I'm reserving judgment for that kind of stuff until I can get one in my hands.
That's true. You should never trust reviews. I trusted reviews on the S5, and I thought I'd be disappointed. I am not.
There you go.
You trusted me. I told you that you were going to be disappointed.
I'm not disappointed, though. The only thing I trusted you with is the fingerprint reader actually working, and it does. I don't trust you, Nick.
Yeah, I know. Nobody should. Nobody trust me. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Don't buy HTC.
So we have two new Motorola phones, and they're an extremely low end and then a regular low end. And now we also have more rumors about the Moto X Plus One. Is that correct?
Yep.
At least we have a new code name for it.
Victara, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Are there any new details to go along with the code name, or is it simply what we've been left with for the last couple of weeks about, a new phone coming, but we still don't know about specs or release dates or anything like that?
The only new detail is that it's coming to all 4 carriers. That's it. No mention of exclusivity for something like Moto Maker. No mention of anything.
There also wasn't any mention of that for the original Moto X, so...
Yep.
Well, for the original Moto X, there were rumors that the Moto Maker would be an exclusive for AT&T, at least like a month before the release.
I also missed that.
So, I mean, there were some of those rumors, but I think it's funny that usually when we start hearing a rumor, there's at least some specs to go along with it. Here we have nothing to go off of. Like, is it going to be competitive with the M8 or the Galaxy S5? Is it going to be competitive with these Prime devices that we're hearing rumors of, or the G3 from LG? What do you guys expect? Are you expecting something that's going to be on the level of current flagships, or are you thinking it's going to be a generation behind like last time?
I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle.
Right. I'm going to guess 4.7-inch 1080p display, and that's going to be one of the things they're going to be like, it's got such a more crisp display. Then I'm guessing Snapdragon 800. They should be super affordable by now. They can probably get them for a dime a dozen, and it should make the Moto X look, incredibly slow side by side. And 2 gigs of RAM. I highly, highly doubt they'd go to 3. Nope. And then they're probably gonna make some improvements to the camera, which they're gonna overhype. And boom, Moto X Plus One. Right, exactly. Which you don't hear a peep about anymore. Ever since it came out, they're like, yeah, this isn't working out quite so well.
We have this thing called ClearPixel that makes your pictures better. Or crappier.
Every pixel is clear instead of colorful.
Yay! All your pictures are washed out and horrible. Congratulations.
So I'm really excited for the X Plus One, and I'm glad we haven't heard any specs, because I can imagine that the announcement is going to be very, very exciting for me. Because when I saw the announcement of the HTC One, disappointment, even though it's a good phone. When I saw the announcement of the S4, disappointment, because the leaks were wrong. But now that we have nothing, I think it's going to be exciting. Not the phone itself, the actual announcement.
Yeah, but I think we're still off from the announcement. Like, we still have
2 months.
month and a half, 2 months. Because the Moto X was announced in late July, wasn't it?
I thought August, but maybe it was July.
They're claiming late summer, so it should be sometime around July, August.
Yeah, late summer typically means August. I'm searching our site right now to see when Moto X actually came.
I remember like it was just yesterday.
So, but, I mean, that's the thing, though. So, like, if you're expecting a Snapdragon 800 for this device, by the time August rolls around, we're expecting the first devices, or at least end of August, the first devices with the Snapdragon 805, which is going to put the 801 to shame. So it would kind of be like last year, where they announced the phone, and it was using an S4 Plus architecture for the chipset when we already had the Snapdragon 600. They were using a chipset that was 8-9 months old by the time the phone came out, and everyone else was moving on to bigger and better, and the 800 chip was right around the corner.
But they could have
And
used the
that's-
S4 Pro. They were even further behind than they could have been.
Oh yeah.
If they choose the 600 or the 800, they won't be that far behind.
Well, if they use the 600, they're going to be way behind. I mean, that chip.
Actually, you
that
have a
chip
point.
is
Yeah.
that
It's a
chip's
year old
already
now.
14 months old now.
Okay, don't use the 600, please. If they use the 800, I'll be very happy. I don't even care about the 801 and 805.
By the time, so let's say they come out in August. The 800 came out what, September? The first phones with the 800 came out.
Around there.
So it's one of those things. It's like they're still 9 to 12 months behind the curve, and it's not that the 800's a bad chip. It's that in order to get people excited, yes, the phone, Motorola has been doing really well on design and their software, but in order to get the people who get excited about phones really excited, you have to have the specs. That's why the OnePlus One, everyone's excited about the OnePlus One, even though it's a new brand, nobody really knows it, they don't have a proven track record, none of that. Everyone's excited about the specs, and people are talking about it. And
Do you
it's
think
not
Motorola
necessarily
taught somebody a
right.
lesson?
What was that?
Do you think Motorola taught any person in this industry a lesson? Everyone hated the Moto X. Like, if you checked any site, all you would see is Moto X is shit, don't buy. And then everybody got their hands on it, and everybody loved it. Do you think anybody learned their lesson?
Well, the difference is
Me.
people love the phone. People who have used the phone love the phone, but you have to have somebody to actually use the phone to love it. The problem is a consumer goes to the store and they cannot use the phone. They have to make a decision. Here's a phone for $400 and these are the specs. Well, this one has better specs. I will buy the one with better specs. And it doesn't matter if you're spec savvy or anything. If you go to someone who doesn't know anything about cars, they walk into a showroom, and here's two cars. They're identical. This one has 400 horsepower. This one has 200 horsepower. And the one with 400 horsepower actually gets better gas mileage than the one with 200 horsepower. Which one are you going to buy? I mean, it doesn't
Well,
matter
the
what
difference is probably going to be at least $10,000, to be fair.
Well, but I mean, but they're probably. The thing is, like, Motorola was selling the Moto X at the same price as a flagship.
And if they didn't learn their lesson, they deserve to crash and burn.
Exactly. I think they learned their lesson. I really think they did. I would be very surprised to see the Moto X come in at more than 400 off contract, and even that would surprise me. Like, I'm expecting them to just blow us away with like 300 or 350 for like an awesome ultimate experience phone, and then right off the bat, free on contract.
That's wishful thinking. As much as I want to hope, that's a bit of wishful thinking.
That's really wishful thinking, considering that the Moto X right now isn't even at that price.
It's
Yeah,
$350.
it is.
It's $400.
Let me look.
It's $350 when they did give you a discount once every other week. But
I
it's
thought it was $300 at discount.
no,
I'm
it's-
checking right now. Hold on.
Moto X.
Design yours.
Why is my
Okay, it's
computer so
$349,
slow?
no contract right now.
Ha.
But how many people buy it through Motomaker versus through a carrier?
It's free on Verizon contract right now. If you went to T-Mobile, if T-Mobile is carrying them in store, they'd be $350 theoretically. If they
You
didn't
check.
jack up the price too much. I don't think you can even get them through T-Mobile's website. I'm not sure though.
I'll check quickly. I got this.
So, Motorola kind of like went out on a limb with the Moto X, right? And they did a lot of good things and did a lot of bad things. The good things are they proved that they can create a premium experience with not premium specs. They also proved that they can't sell not premium specs at a premium price despite what the experience dictates. So I personally learned not to judge a book by its cover and to get a phone in my hands. I mean, even more so than before, that I need to just like go in it with no prejudice and see like for myself how it operates. And hopefully on Motorola's end, they learned that if you try to release a phone with an 801 or an 800 for $650 again, you're going to see the same terrible, terrible abysmal sales.
Yeah.
I really hope they learned their lesson. I really, really do.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, they were under Google. Honestly, I don't know why Google would allow them to price the phone at that, because Google is selling Nexus devices with better specs, with a stock Android experience, for $150 to $200 less than what they were selling the Moto X for.
Let's be fair, though. Google isn't exactly the smartest company. They like to throw things at the wall and see what sticks just as much as any others.
Oh, this is true, but as far as business, honestly, like, I think we said this on the last podcast. Motorola has done some really good stuff in the smartphone world, but their business savvy hasn't gotten them where they need to be. The company's been sold twice in the last couple of years. It keeps bleeding cash. I don't think they've had a positive quarter in the last 4 or 5 years. There's a reason for that. The people who are making decisions in the company on a financial level, on a product level, are not making the right decisions. Regardless of it's a good phone or it's a bad phone, these devices are not good financially for the company.
The main thing I took away from Motorola last year was, imagine two groups of people within the company. One group is saying, we take something like the Moto X, we create a premium experience with these specs, blah, blah, blah. We'll sell it through the U.S. on contract as a flagship device. We'll see how it performs. And the other group is saying, no, Moto G is the future. We take a phone that has slimmer profit margins, but we can just sell a ton of them. And that's the Motorola of the future. At the end of the year, when they're looking at their yearly results, the money speaks for itself. So hopefully, if nothing else, that alone will show them, like, well, which approach do we take to the Moto X Plus One? Do we do the same thing we did with the Moto X, or do we kind of start to travel down the road of the Moto G? I just really, I don't know. There was an interview like a week or two ago about where some Motorola executive was talking about Moto 360, and one of the things that got brought up was the price point of the Moto G, and they said that it's a premium, that the Moto 360 is a premium device. You can't expect it to like tail right behind the Moto G and Moto E and be really close to that cost, because the amount of R&D and everything that's gone into it, what I got out of it. So clearly everybody in Motorola, even the people that are leading different product categories, are thinking about the kind of success that they've gotten off of Moto G.
So one last comment about how you were saying about cheaper devices and trying to sell as many as possible to meet the bottom line. I think the king of that was Nokia. While Nokia hasn't been a huge player in the smartphone race, Nokia to this day is still the best-selling smartphone brand on the globe, and they have been for the last 12, 13, 14 years. They sell so many phones, it's ridiculous. But those phones have no margins, and because those phones have, like, they have all the market share in the world if you're just counting phones. But those devices that they're selling have no margins, and you look every quarter, they're selling 30, 40 million phones, and profit margins for the company, they're coming in, hey, we made $1 million. You sold 40 million phones and you made $1 million. Something's not right with that equation.
Something's not right about Nokia, to be fair. Their whole system is
that's their strategy. That was their go-to market strategy. Let's create cheap phones that we can sell in high volumes. If you create them, the more you make, the cheaper they are to make. The more cheaper they are, the lower the price. And it's a cyclical thing. Like you can shoot for the bottom, and you can grab the entire market. But when you shoot for the bottom,
isn't shooting for the bottom with the Moto G. They're shooting for the mid-range market at a fairly low price. The Moto E is trying to shoot for the bottom, and I don't feel like they're doing the right thing with the Moto E. for our market specifically.
Yeah.
Well, it's like we talked about last week, or not last week, whenever we did the last podcast, that Motorola hopefully has some kind of plan to make money on these things. They can't simply sell phones for $130 at a 5-10% profit margin and hope to make all of their money on like replaceable shells or something crazy like that. Like, they have to have some kind of plan in place, and we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. Well,
Whether
hopefully
it's
they'll
still
have a plan
costs
in
more than
place.
10% of the Moto E. The shells are $15 each. That's more than 10% of the phone. Kind of unbelievable. Not
Right, so-
wrong. It's just funny to think about.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why accessory makers love the business that they're in. Is they sell an accessory, they sell a case for a phone, they sell it for $30. It costs them a penny to make. They make that stuff in China. It's plastic molding. That's all it is. It costs them more to ship it from China than it actually costs them to make the thing. And they're selling it at a 5,000% markup.
It's a glorious, glorious business.
Yeah. I mean, that's why accessory makers love to be in the business of accessory makers, because your markups are freaking ridiculous.
We should start a case company.
You should. I mean, honestly, you can get the 3D modelings for these phones and buy a 3D printer. Go make your own. Go for
Phone
it.
cases and me.
Phonecasesandme.com. My phone and
Each
me.
article is buyer cases.
Yeah, buy this now. So going from one extreme to the other, we have the LG G3 rumors and multiple leaks. It seems like every other day there's another leak of this phone showing off the device inside another case or something like that. What are we expecting from this?
Sexiness.
Honestly, I was not a huge fan of the G2, the look of the phone. I like the feel of it. I like the size of it. I didn't like the look. But they've done something, they've fine-tuned it for the G3, and it looks really nice.
On my trip to LA, I held the G2 for the first time. Those bezels are just mind-blowing. It made me want a G2 instantly. And then I played with an HTC One M8 at the same time, and it's literally just like a few millimeters off the size of my Note 3. And I loved the phone. I really did. It really impressed me. But it's so freaking big. It's unbelievable.
So the G3 though just looks. I wish there was a Nexus 6 to look forward to based off of that phone. I wish.
We could look forward to the Google Play edition.
Or you could just root it.
Dear.
So before we circle back to your comment just now, Dustin, about wishing it was a Nexus 6, the G3 is expected to have I know Dima hates this, a 2K display, QHD, a quad HD.
No, it's
display.
WQHD, right?
You can call it either QHD or WQHD.
Yeah, there's
WQHD is
multiple
more technical,
variations.
but QHD
Yeah.
works too, as long as it's not 2K, because it's not 2K.
Wait, real quick. We have a vote that we all use WQHD from now on. That's my vote. Show of hands.
Well, you can only use WQHD if that's the exact resolution.
Right, which is like
Because-
2560 by 1440, right?
No, but some displays are simply QHD, which is a different resolution from. So they're not the exact pixel resolution.
No,
Show
QHD
of
refers to the same resolution. WQHD and QHD are literally the same thing. Both terms apply to the same thing, 2560 by 1440. Because 2560 by 1600, which you might be thinking of, is this crazy name like WQXGA or whatever.
Okay, show of hands who wants to use 2K just to make Dima mad.
Me. Pick me. Pick me.
Alright,
Dima quits
2
the
against
internet.
1. We're saying 2K from now on every
2K.
time.
It's a 2K display.
Okay, anyway, back to
I
where
quit.
you were.
Back to where I was. So it's supposed to have a 2K display. 3 gigs of RAM, 13 megapixel camera, and Isn't it supposed to have the Snapdragon 805?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so.
So that's where I'm confused, because Qualcomm said Snapdragon 805s are not going to be coming until the second half of the year, which means July 1st at the soonest. So if they're going to announce this before July 1st, which it seems like they are, it doesn't line up with Qualcomm's timeline.
Well, they can announce it and not even have the product in hand. And they could do some quick manufacturing and release it like July 15th.
This is true. But usually,
Close.
I mean, based off of when typically the phones are announced and when they're released, they typically line up really well with what Qualcomm says.
They follow schedules of the device manufacturers that have been set for like a year or two. Like the Note 3 came out with a 800, but it was months after the 800 officially came out. But that's because the Note 3's the notes were always available at that specific time, September, October. I think that just because LG has a different schedule, they might manage it early. I think they could manage it early, just because they have a different schedule of any other manufacturer, besides maybe Motorola, but they're not using the 805.
No, Motorola is not using the 805. So based off of what we know, I mean, do we expect this actually to grab market share from Samsung and HTC?
No.
The G2 was, honestly, it was a really impressive device. It had, it was one of the first flagships with the 800. It had a great camera with great image stabilization, really good battery life, and as you said, the bezels are freaking amazing. But it failed to impress. I mean, like right now, I think you can buy it on most, or I think AT&T has it for $50 on contract, when even last year's HTC One is like $100 on contract.
Let me make this one point. Some case manufacturers are not even going to make cases for the G3 specifically because the G2 sold so poorly.
But just to make a point, we've seen at least a dozen cases for the G3 with all the leaked pictures. So there will be good accessory support.
Oh, I'm not doubting that. I'm just saying that the LG G2 sold like crap.
Yeah, it was a horrible selling device. Honestly, personally, I have not seen it in the wild.
I've seen one in the wild, and a tech nerd owned it.
So, Dustin, would you buy one?
A G3?
Yeah.
I would be very, very tempted. I honestly think the G2, like in person, was probably one of the most impressive looking phones. I detest what LG has done with Android. I really don't like it. I think
they've copied Samsung on every single item and done it slightly worse.
Yeah.
Right, like the white
hardware is better.
Ugh.
The software is horrible.
But hardware-wise, like I was really surprised by the camera on the G2. The display was phenomenal on it. It felt really good in the hand. The buttons on the back were kind of wonky, but I think it'll sell good. I can't see myself paying for $700 for an unlocked phone like that.
I think it'll drop in price really fast, though. The LG G2 from AT&T directly currently costs $465.
That's not bad. I would consider buying one maybe a year later, but especially because I don't know. Last year it was kind of like the G2 came out and then the Nexus 5, and they were so close that personally I preferred the look and the feel of the Nexus 5 over the G2 anyway. But to, echo an earlier comment, if we're supposedly not going to have a Nexus 6 to look forward to, then maybe the G3 or a G3 in the same shell, just running stock Android, is going to be your best, closest thing you could get anyway.
So the one thing that's going to set this phone apart, at least for now, is the fact that it's rumored to feature an a laser sensor on the back so that you can shoot people.
Which
Built
is
in
awesome.
lasers. I'm sold.
Like, if that was real, I would totally do it. Even if it was just a laser pointer, that would be awesome.
It's supposed to
No,
be used for focusing, right?
yeah. So
Yeah,
right
fast
now,
focus.
most autofocus cameras do really well for focusing, except in low light situations, because it can, like the HTC One M8, it can take great pictures in low light. The sensor can pick up the information once the image is captured, but as it's trying to capture and trying to capture focus, there's not enough light to actually get the right focus for the image. So some cameras use, like, they do a burst with their flash so that they can see something, and then it takes a picture after doing a burst with the flash. The burst with the flash is actually so that it can get the focus. Rather than doing that, this would use a laser so that it would shoot out a laser beam to the item, whatever it's focusing on, and the sensor would pick up the laser light and then focus on that. Which I think is ingenious, but maybe a little bit of overkill for maybe 5%, 10% of your pictures. I don't know.
I think it would actually shoot the laser at the whatever you're supposed to be focusing on, light it on fire, and use that light to focus.
Dude, that would be the best option.
Or it'll be like, help you find how to shine it just right into somebody's eyes.
Especially ex-girlfriends. You're like, hold still, I'm going to take a picture of you.
Soon to be ex-girlfriends, at least.
With my new quick fire camera.
Literally. I don't know if it's going to sell well, but I'm excited for it nonetheless. It looks pretty damn amazing.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, LG's been doing some great things on the hardware side. If they can fix their software situation, there may be hope for them. Who knows? Like, if they could, I don't know, like, take a page out of Motorola's playbook and, dumb it down as much as possible and focus on actually giving consumers a value add rather than a layer with a whole bunch of garbage on top that's not intuitive and looks like crap.
Yeah, we talk a lot of shit about Samsung software, but LG is on a whole different level.
Yeah, well, and we don't talk about it a lot on the LG side because the phones simply aren't as popular.
Yeah,
so fewer people are actually using it, and so us bitching about it will only help the 5 people who actually own the phones.
Fewer people will comment agreeing with us because nobody actually knows.
Yeah.
To put it into perspective, in the second quarter last year, LG had 5.1% of the market, which is third best overall. So, I mean, they're considerably pretty popular, really. But
not with their flagships.
Samsung had 30% of the market, so
6 times.
Yeah, it's in the U.S. especially, it's not even a competition.
Don't forget that they're most popular in many... Wait, is this for U.S. only?
No, that's global.
Yeah, don't forget that their most popular phones are outside the U.S. Budget phones. A lot of people in developing countries, not developing countries, like not so rich countries, buy LG like cheap phones to use instead of iPhones.
I do love LG's hardware. Their screens are always great. Whatever camera sensors they're using always seem to be pretty good. They make all-around good phones. It's just, I honestly kind of feel like they just got the luck of the draw. If they had put the same amount of money into advertising and hired the same firms as Samsung did when they did it, LG would totally be in Samsung's position right now.
I agree. They're like identical companies in so many ways. LG and Samsung are like brother and sister, but they're just the sibling that never got popular.
Right.
Kind of feel bad for them now, thinking about it that way. Yeah, they make solid phones, no doubt about that.
So as you were getting into this, you made a comment about wishing it was a Nexus 6, and we've recently had news or rumor that there will no longer be, or there is no plan from Google to develop and sell a Nexus 6. According to EvLeaks, I believe, it's the Nexus 6 or the Nexus phone program is going to be replaced with Android Silver, which is the details of the program are still kind of murky, but essentially it would be Google working directly with manufacturers to sell manufacturer-branded devices through carrier partners and do retail promotion for these devices. And the software experience would be unique, but most likely catered or centered around something similar to what we see on Google Play Edition devices, which is nearly stock Android.
Yep.
Excited, happy, sad. What was that?
Sad because the Nexus line is basically popular because it's cheap. You can say anything about stock Android and quick updates, but it's really damn cheap. And the Nexus line of tablets was extremely popular for that one reason. And with the Nexus line gone and Android Silver in, we're going to lose all that value.
So to be clear, EvLeaks' rumor was centered or targeted specifically at the Nexus 6, and it made no mention of Nexus tablets. And we actually have credible rumors that the HTC is working with Google on a Nexus tablet.
I'm not saying there won't be tablets. I'm saying the Nexus line is popular because of its price.
Yeah.
Citing the tablet popularity purely due to price. Not many people buy the Nexus 5 purely because it's stock Android and quick updates. They buy it because it's cheap off contract. And that's going to disappear.
Well, then you got a Moto G.
Oh, yeah. Google Play Edition Moto G.
OnePlus, right?
Well, and that's the thing. So, I mean, we're all talking about cheaper phones and cheaper flagships, but the only people actually making these devices is Oppo under the OnePlus brand and Motorola with their flagship mid-range cheap phones. We really don't have anyone else who's actually playing in this game. And for anyone to succeed, I mean, if anyone does succeed, it would bring the whole market down. You know, if Sony started selling their flagship phones for, $350 off contract or $400, it would force HTC and Samsung and LG. But I don't think any of the major brands are going to do it because I think they know once they do, they're throwing away any possibility of having, high returns on smartphones. You go from having a 40% profit margin down to having a 10% profit margin.
That'd be awesome if one company just sacrifices its own profit margins to screw everyone else over. That'd be hilarious.
The only way that I can make sense of this in my head is if something happened like, let's say Google's talking to all these manufacturers and they say something like, it's not too late. Like, we can stop selling $350 Nexus phones and you guys can retain your high profit margins, but in exchange, you have to get involved in what we're calling the Android Silver project, where we're going to tell you what to put on your phones, and we're going to give you guidance on how to make them. And in return, you not only get to maintain your high profit margin because it will no longer be trying to saturate the market with the high-end market with low-priced handsets. We'll also foot the bill for advertising, and we'll set up carrier in-store displays. That's the only way I can, in my head, justify of how this would make sense. Is if Google just maybe they were sick of making Nexus phones, maybe the profit margins just weren't good enough, and they were maybe using it as like leverage to get companies, I don't know, to follow their orders, or to me it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense really of why they would quit selling it unless it was just one way to get manufacturers on board with Android Silver or something. Because otherwise, why would they want to? So supposedly Google's going to control a certain part of the software experience. Why would HTC or Samsung or LG or Sony want to sacrifice their custom smartphone experience that they're trying to get customers to buy into and try to lock them into their custom experience and get them accustomed to it, and all that comes, everything that comes along with third-party manufacturer customizations? What could possibly be worth them giving that up for? What did Google offer them to give that up, if this is true?
Why did they start making Google Play Edition devices in the first place?
I mean, I think it was like a small project that there's no way those phones are selling, even remotely close to the amount that Nexus phones were selling. And especially compare that to the next level up of their normal flagship variants, there's no way the One Play Edition or the S4 Play Edition came close to touching their normal handset sales.
So the difference here
between will be the same way, don't you?
No, it's completely different. So right now, Google Play Editions are only available through Google Play, and they are more expensive than the flagship phones sold off contract, which is kind of ridiculous because, hey, we're going to give you a flagship phone and not give you any of the software features that were made specifically for this hardware and charge you more for it. It's completely ridiculous. The reason why a manufacturer would want to sign up for Android Silver right now is everyone's vying for a spot to make a Nexus device. Even though the devices essentially are sold at cost, it gives them the opportunity to work closely with Google, get a quick peek at the next version of Android that's coming down the pipeline, and work with the creator of the software that's running these phones. That's why you want to create a Nexus device, even though you might not make a profit on it. And Google is probably doing the Android Silver line because people are complaining. Well, you've been working with LG for 3 years on these devices, and when's our turn? And HTC is sitting on the sideline saying, hey, our profit margins are going down the drain. We're struggling to make a profit. LG is this huge conglomerate of a company that's making money left and right. When's our turn? But then Sony turns around and says, hey, when's our turn? We're kind of struggling in the smartphone market. Actually, Sony's not. They're actually doing pretty well right now. But everyone, it's the Open Handset Alliance. And the Nexus program has been a closed-down Nexus program. Android Silver turns the tables and says, anybody who makes an Android device can make an Android Silver device, and we will work closely with you. We will market these products for you. We will give you retail store space. We guarantee that the carriers are going to pick them up. I mean, there's so many guarantees with it, if that's actually how it's being played out, is HTC can't compete with Samsung because they don't have the marketing buy-in, right? HTC, I mean, look at reviews for the last couple of years, consumer and user reviews. They've had better reviews for their devices, but yet Samsung sells more because they market more, and that's simple economics. I mean, put something in front of somebody more often and you're going to convince more people to buy it. So if you don't come to the table and don't participate in Android Silver, everyone else is getting something for free and you're not, and so you get screwed by not participating.
Yeah, I mean, that part makes sense to me, but I just simply cannot imagine any, program leads or whatever or executives at LG sitting down and saying, oh, the G2 is not selling well enough, we're not making enough money, we're not getting enough people to get into our LG suite of apps. What we really need right now is to see the next version of Android early and work with Google to make a lower profit Nexus phone. It's going to cost us more money to develop and more money. If anything, I think Android Silver, if it's closer to the Google Play Edition, that they can just have the same exact handset, but just have a small software team develop stock Android for it, and then Google's offering yeah, we'll foot the bill on everything. All you got to do is make the phone, and we'll sell it for you. Trust us. That, to me, that makes sense. But the part that I'm having a hard time with is, so that means that Google has to quit doing the Nexus program. The only thing I can think of is they're saying, well, just because you're going to foot the bill for, carrier advertising and make sure and guarantee that it's going to get sold through carriers and picked up, that doesn't mean that somebody's not going to go buy, a Nexus phone for $350 off contract anyway, because it's eating into everybody's bottom line. Even if they only sold 1 million of them, that's still 1 million HTC Ones that could have been sold, which would have really helped HTC.
Well, and if you think about it, you're giving up profit margin. You sell 1 million of those, and that phone technically should be priced at $600 if you compare it to everybody else. Guess what? You gave up $300 million of profit selling it at $300 versus $600. That's $300 million. How much profit has HTC made in the last couple of years? 300 million. Like, just it doesn't seem like a lot of money until you factor in, like, these companies are struggling to make money. I think Google probably realized that their push to get Android on cheaper and cheaper devices and create this bargain basement, it was not the best idea for the market itself. Yes, it's good for consumers. It's bad for the manufacturers. And in the end, everybody loses out. If the manufacturer is not making money, the manufacturer is going to go out of business. That means the consumer is not going to get the product. We saw the same thing in the PC industry where everyone drove to the bottom. How many companies went bankrupt or broke up and split up and were bought? And, Lenovo is sitting on top right now as the king of, the PC market, but Lenovo bought IBM's computer business because IBM was going broke. HP went broke doing their thing. EPC, which started the netbook craze, they went out of business. We have
EPC
Asus
was made by
Asus.
Asus.
Yeah, but I mean, like, they had their separate brand with the EPC, and it's one of those things, like, everyone was driving for the bottom of the market, and that's where everyone was going, and everybody lost money on that.
Yeah, I guess my point is that Android, if Google stops making Nexus phones and they start Android Silver instead, and all Android Silver devices are $650 flagships, is this them essentially saying, screw the customer, we got to do what's best for business, which might not necessarily in turn be best for the consumer,
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not going to go... I mean, if I didn't even have a choice of buying a Nexus 5 or something, like, my only choices were, if I was buying an Android phone, my only choices were any Android Silver phone compared to something like the Moto G, I would probably pick the Moto G because I don't know if I'd be willing to spend $700 after tax and everything to get a flagship Android phone. Especially when that, it's kind of like once you've tasted the sweetest fruit, you don't want to go back to anything else.
Well, but then it goes to, I mean, yes, the Moto G is a good device, but when you put the Moto G against the HTC One M8 or the Samsung Galaxy S5, it's a piece. I mean, yes, it's good when you're using just that, but when you actually compare it side by side with something, it's a piece.
But that's what I'm saying. The problem comes in for me, where it's like, yeah, I can either choose a $220 no tax, shipping free Moto G, or I could choose a $300 One Plus that has the same exact specs as the One M8, or after tax and everything. If I were to go buy one, I'm going to spend $700. I could literally buy 3 Moto Gs and have some cash to go blow on sushi or something for the price of one HTC One. And now that consumers know that, I'm just wondering how Google is going to spin this as it's good for the consumer.
Let me make this point quickly to expand on Dustin's point. If Google's not going to do it, someone else will. If the Nexus 6 is not going to be sold, people are going to go buy the OnePlus One. People are going to go buy the Moto X Plus One for $350 or $400. If Google won't do it, someone else will.
I totally agree with you on that, but OnePlus came out and said the reason why our phone is so cheap is because we're selling it at cost. That's not a sustainable business model.
It technically is in a way. You can make it a sustainable business model if you're smart enough. Now I'm hoping that Oppo is smart enough. It's simple as that.
Honestly, I don't think they are. I mean, every time you see any industry race for the bottom, the industry implodes on itself.
But that's the thing. This industry is not headed to the bottom. Only a few companies are pushing towards the middle.
But those companies that are pushing towards the bottom are the ones that are going to file for bankruptcy first.
Maybe Motorola will, but OnePlus is not pushing towards the bottom. $350 is a significant chunk of change.
But it's at cost. That's the point.
It's at cost. If you're making $1 profit off of every phone that you're selling, might as well go sell bubblegum. I mean,
yes. Let me bring up the console industry again. Xbox was selling for not even at cost. It was selling way under.
Microsoft sells licensing for games. Every game that sells, they make money on. That's where they make their revenue. OnePlus doesn't have that.
Yes, but they were losing hundreds of dollars, not just a little bit of money, hundreds of dollars.
They make $20 for every game that sells.
Yes, but I'm saying that they turned it around with the next line of products. Oppo could sell one line at cost, and then since they have that chunk of money from all of Oppo's other phones, they could make the next model at the same price, but with a bigger profit margin. It's just about starting that brand.
In order to do that, they have to have a way to make money on it. Xbox had a way to make money, which is so.
But they're not a new company.
There's two things that happen with Xbox. One, they made the same system for like 7 years plus now. So when you're buying the same parts for 7 years straight, eventually they get dirt cheap. You simply could not do that with a phone. And two, even if they were losing money or breaking even on Xbox, they still were able to break even simply because they were selling the software licenses. What could Oppo possibly do to sell their phones at cost but actually make money like Microsoft does with software licenses?
But that's the thing. They make tons of money on their other phones. OnePlus is not a new brand. They have the backing of Oppo. Oppo could be smart, sell OnePlus phones at cost for a year, maybe 2 years, lose some money on it, and then start selling with a higher profit margin at still low prices when they have the chance. It's all about investing and then getting a long-term return. They could actually make this business model work because they have the money to back it at the moment. If OnePlus was a startup, they would totally fail.
Something like that could possibly work, but the problem is with like Asus's EEE PCs, netbook sales started ballooning where traditional notebooks started plummeting. And what happened was they expected people to buy in with netbooks, right? And then like supplement with high profit margin desktops or with software or by upgrading to notebooks eventually. And then what kind of happened is all of these dedicated netbook companies fizzled out because they didn't have a good enough of a transition or an upsell or any sort of, contingency plan or even continuation plan in mind. So
that's what happens when an entire industry jumps on something low profit, which was a very silly idea if you look back on it. Right now we don't have that industry jumping on it. We have a few companies pushing towards it. Unlike a sudden jump towards it, we have a gradual move towards it, and I think that OnePlus could actually make it work.
Well, the thing is, the EPC netbooks were out for 1.5 to 2 years before everyone else jumped on it. The reason why everyone else jumped on it is because that became one of the most popular brands within a 2-year span.
But you forget that they were terrible.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. If they sell, they sell. So it's all about market share. if they start taking away market share, so if Oppo with their OnePlus One, with their zero profit margin devices start selling and start picking up market share, it doesn't matter if there's no money in it. To maintain market share, everyone else will drop their prices to match it so that they can steal back their profit margins. In the end, everybody's dropping their profit margins, and there's no money left in the industry. I mean, honestly, this goes back to when I was in business school and we were running business market simulations. And it's a class of 500 people, and there's this computer program, and every week you get to choose. You're running a business with a team, and you can invest in new technologies, you can reduce your price, you can up your marketing, and everybody's competing against each other. And the person who, as soon as one group started going towards the bottom and started gaining market share, everyone else started to follow, because they thought, if I don't have the market share, I can't sustain this business. Versus those people who said, no, we're going to continually invest in innovation. They lost market share, and because they didn't drive towards the bottom, even though there was less profits, they went out of business as well, because they simply had no market share anymore, even though they were selling high margin products. But I mean, this coming back to the computer comparison, my question to you, Dustin, because you were saying you would rather buy the Moto G for the price when you could buy 3 Moto Gs versus the one M8. Flip it around. I think it comes back to priorities, because you have a new MacBook Air.
No, so this is gonna add to your point. I actually exchanged it for a MacBook Pro 13 Retina with 8 gigs of RAM and a 256
Okay,
gig
so
solid state.
what's the sticker price on that?
Like $1,500.
Okay, so how many? Let's see. Lenovo has some pretty decent laptops that are like $450 with HD displays and 4 gigs of RAM, massive hard drives. How many of those could you have bought instead of that one MacBook?
Okay, so I admit that I'm like.
So it's kind of it's where your priorities are.
Right, I admit that I'm playing devil's advocate a bit here too. I mean, obviously I live on my laptop. So for school, for work, I need it to be top of the line. And honestly, my phone it kind of supplements my laptop. For somebody who's in the opposite position, yeah, I could understand why they would say, I don't even have a laptop, so I want a top-of-the-line Note 4, and I'm willing to pay $700 off contract for it, because for 2 years, it's never going to leave my side. It's going to be my camera, my everything. I guess, my biggest hope for the industry is that all of these companies, and especially Google, if they're leading the charge on this, that they've learned from their mistakes in the past, and then there can be a well-established high, mid, and low end, and that anybody that makes phones for each of those tiers can still create innovative, interesting, quality experiences on every end. If Motorola makes like a $400 phone off contract, and a $200 phone off contract, and a $600 phone off contract, there should be a differentiation between every one of those devices, but it doesn't mean that they have to suffer in quality. And I don't know, it was really nice to see Google bucking the trend and kind of starting that with the Nexus 4, of saying that we can make a device that has what most would consider high-end specs at a mid-range price. And, just when you compare something like the Nexus 5 to the HTC One Mini, where they might be like in the same price category, the difference in experience is just so far from good to just absolutely terrible. Hopefully then somebody can make something closer maybe to the Moto X then, where they can still use mid-range specs but still make an awesome experience. And when you buy in at the mid-range, you know what kind of sacrifices you're willing to make.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you on that. I think there needs to be some middle ground to what manufacturers offer. I mean, for the longest time, a mid-range phone was a $450 phone, and off contract. So you had high end for 600 and $150 less was your 450. And I think we're seeing the mid-range segment drop a little bit. Like the HTC Desire 816 is a 5.5-inch display, 720p, 13 megapixel camera, front-facing 5 megapixel camera. It has LTE, it has 8 gigs of storage, micro SD up to 128 gigabytes, boom sound speakers. It's got, HTC is calling it their flagship mid-range, and in China that's selling for $399 US. So I mean, it's coming down. My issue is when the prices drop so much and the manufacturers are selling the devices at cost or at extremely thin profit margins. They can hope to gain market share, but it's at the detriment of the entire market. It's benefiting them in a short term, and it's setting expectations for consumers that the prices are going to keep dropping when in reality there's really no more, the prices can't drop any further because they would be losing money. So how do you put you sell a phone at cost on launch day, how does that phone go on sale? Like, when do you offer a sale on that? Like, you can't. There's no Christmas sale or Thanksgiving sale or anything like that, because you put it on sale and you're paying somebody to take your phone from you.
To be fair, I liked that Nexus program specifically because it did not have big market share and it did not need to make a profit or gain market share. It was just there for those who wanted it. And that's why I liked the Nexus program so much. It changed towards the end, but it didn't used to be like what it is now. So, I mean, I liked that. It wasn't a detriment to anybody in the market, and it gave a certain subset of consumers what they wanted.
Yeah,
if they kept it that way, it would have been great. It's not sustainable, but if they could have kept it that way, that would have been great.
I think things changed because the Nexus program was actually gaining traction.
Yeah,
the Nexus 5. The Nexus 5 was the best-selling Nexus device we've ever had. It's available on T-Mobile. It's selling really well on T-Mobile. I actually see that phone quite a bit in the wild. And people are always saying, "Oh, did you buy? Did you get the Nexus phone? You can buy it right from Google. It's really cheap." I mean, it's something that's now because people are now looking to buy phones, because T-Mobile's changed the way here in the U.S. They've changed the way that people are actually looking to buy phones. People are actually looking to buy off-contract phones, something that never would have happened 2 years ago. So the market's changing, and I think Google, while it's sad to see the Nexus brand go away, at least for phones, I think Google's realizing that if they don't take it away, they could be hurting themselves in the long run, because if the manufacturers making their phones stop making money, that means in the long run they stop making phones running Android, which means Google's Android program is at risk. If they're bankrupting their own manufacturers, that's not a good plan.
Yeah, when you the further you zoom out and the more you look at the big picture, the more complicated it becomes.
There's so many different facets to it.
Right. It starts at the very base, in the very minuscule middle. It's hard not to think, well, consumers are getting screwed because they're not getting at-cost hardware anymore, and that's best for consumers because it helps spread technology and helps empower people, and the internet kind of helps level the playing field, and Android is the one that's bringing it to people. Well, then you zoom out a little bit, and then you say, okay, well, it's actually hurting every other company that's not willing to sacrifice these kind of profit margins. And then you zoom out a little bit, and you say, okay, well, the companies that are hurting, they just fired thousands of people. Zoom out a little bit more, oh, guess what? LG is completely falling apart, which means the Korean market took a huge hit. Now the Korean dollar is weakened, and the further you zoom out, the more you realize that it becomes a problem that affects a lot more than just consumers who are buying phones off contract.
Yeah. I mean, it's the whole thing of capitalism. Capitalism, there's so many different views on capitalism about it should be checked, it should not be checked. In a perfect world, capitalism rules itself and it runs itself. If there's no infighting, if there's no trade secrets, if there's no in-trade, it creates a better market for itself, and the better company wins. In the long term, yeah, some companies might have to fail, some other ones don't. But if you stop considering what's the human impact of capitalism. If it's all about the profit margins or it's all about gaining market share, then yeah, go for it. But you're going to have to fire 500,000 of your employees. What's the impact then? As you were saying, the more you zoom out, there's greater and greater implications to it. And I think Google's maybe seeing that and saying, with Android Silver, we could actually benefit the manufacturers and give everybody a chance to work with us, and give consumers a better product. It might not be a cheaper product, but it'll be a better product if they don't really like the whatever the software experience is that the manufacturers are offering now.
Nick, riddle me this.
Yeah.
If I create a phone company, sell phones at cost with a backing of a few $1,000,000 that I happen to have laying around in the couch, and I gain enough market share to the point where all the other companies are forced to drop their prices, I could crash an entire market just for fun.
You could.
Yeah.
You totally could.
Let me dig through my couch and find a few $1,000,000 to sustain myself.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, it's totally possible. But so you have to realize these companies, they are publicly traded companies, and their goal is to create a profit for the shareholders. That's their goal. So the shareholders can vote in and out board members, and the board members are supposed to hire the CEO. The CEO is supposed to hire the vice presidents and the managers, and it goes down the chain. And in the end, it's all about making a profit for these companies. For me personally, like, I'm looking at HTC, and HTC was one of the biggest smartphone manufacturers in the world, but they've always been a niche product manufacturer. They only sell smartphones when everyone else is selling smartphones and 1,000 other products. So they're in a unique situation, and personally, I would hope if this year goes by and HTC can't find a way to make a profit in the general market, scale things back completely. Like, they scaled things back, and they offered a lot fewer devices. Take the Apple route. Offer one phone, you have one line of devices, you fire 95% of your employees. It's not good for the employees, but if you're only selling the HTC One and you're only promoting the HTC One and you only have an engineering team engineering the HTC One and you only have software development for the HTC One, hey, guess what? Your overhead cost for the company just dropped by 95%. But
they're losing everything that actually got them money in the first place, which is their mid-range.
No, but I mean, if you start over from scratch, if they did that, I mean, you look at a lot of companies that go into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and for years and years and years they were losing money, and because they went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, the courts allowed them to break up contracts. They were able to fire people. They were able to break up unions, renegotiate contracts, and start over with a fresh slate. Their first couple years that they started over, they weren't making a profit, but 5 years later, they're making hundreds of millions of dollars because they completely changed their infrastructure internally of how the company was run, not necessarily what they offered to the public, but how things are running on the inside. And so,
well, that, of course, they have to do. They grew too fast, and I think they made a lot of mistakes in the way they run the company. So I feel like giving up the Desire line would be very foolish on their part, don't you?
No, but so yeah, giving up like you have one HTC One, you have one HTC, like you pick, right now you go to their international website, they have like 16 phones listed that they're currently selling. And HTC is a small company compared to most, but they have 10,000 employees. I mean, if you compare,
It grew too fast, and they got cocky. They thought
but
they
like,
would forever.
but even like with their revenue, if you compare them to a U.S. company, we have the Fortune 500 for the U.S. companies. They would be like a Fortune 200 company. Like they would be in the top 200 largest companies in the United States, and all they do is sell smartphones. And so, I mean, put it in perspective, like 3M, which has like 30,000 employees in the U.S., is like ranked 101 or something on the Fortune 500 list, and they sell
Everything.
5,000 different products. Just to put that into perspective. But I mean, I don't know. There's 1,000 different things that you look at the economics of these businesses and the whole smartphone market, and there's 1,000 different ways that you can make money. But how many are actually sustainable in the long run?
Well, that's why Google is looking for absolutely everything to keep sustainable. They're going into the hardware market with the whole Nest stuff. They're buying companies left and right, trying to branch out as much as possible to keep going, no matter what. And HTC hasn't done a single thing about that.
Yeah.
Hopefully this just brings more structure to the market. If anything, if it just brought that alone, then I'd be happy personally, I guess, to see that if there was, like I said before, if there was defined hardware segments and everybody that participated in each segment was still able to make some money and they're able to satisfy a range of consumer needs and, everybody wins in the long run. So that's what's going to happen, right?
And rainbows.
Yeah.
Rainbows and butterflies.
But
Ta-da.
no, we are selfishly wanting a no-profit phone. We suck.
I hate myself.
You should.
And all of you too. All of you. Everybody's watching.
It's funny though. Like, so I was gonna make the point of your MacBook Air, and then you said you traded in for the MacBook Pro, and it just reinforced my point of it all depends on what you're willing to spend your money on. Somebody who's willing to spend a lot of money on a computer is the same person who is driving a beat-up car they've been driving for 25 years.
Yeah, I have an 01 Honda Civic with my MacBook Pro, so
your MacBook Pro is probably
more.
worth more than your car is. And so, I mean, to put that into perspective, like I'm willing to spend every year, I'm willing to spend $600 to $700 on a new phone, and I have a $900 laptop that's 2 years old, and I'm not willing to spend the money to upgrade it. And so it's one of those things. It's like, what's your priority? I spend a lot of time on this laptop. It's just I don't feel the need to upgrade, but I love having a new phone. It's what I like. And so everyone's got their different things.
In my defense, I'm upgrading from a 2010 MacBook Pro. So I used the same computer for over 4 years before getting this one. So I try to be smart about stuff. And I guess the thing is, like, if I could get, I'm a Mac user, period. I don't make any, any noise about it. I'm not, that's just how it is. If I could get a computer running OS 10 at cost, then hell yeah, I would. And as soon as I knew about it, and as soon as, that's kind of where I was going with the Android phones. Like, I've had stock Android phones that have top-line specs for $300. It's going to be really hard to go back to buying them for $600 or $200 on contract
or
to get those same specs again.
Contract.
Right,
I know what you mean, but I can't respect you for using OS 10.
It is what it is.
See, I'm the opposite. I bought a Mac Mini and I installed Windows on it.
Nice.
I bought it for the pretty and compact hardware, and I was like, this is going to be a great Windows PC.
Y'all crazy.
I'm crazy. And with that, I think we're going to call it a night. I want to thank you guys for being on the podcast. Hopefully it's not another 2 weeks till we're on again, but who knows. If you like the podcast, please leave us a review on Stitcher or iTunes or anywhere else that you can leave a review. There's a couple other places. We can't remember them. There's too many. I was looking at the stats to see what sites or what apps people use to download the podcast, and there's like 35 to 40 different ones, which is ridiculous. So thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Again, leave us a comment or review. If you want to tell us that we're ugly, I got bad hair, I do need a haircut, it's getting ridiculous. I will not shave for you. That's one thing. My beard's been going for 6 years. It's not coming off. Tough luck.
6 years?
6 years.
Did somebody tell you they wanted you to shave?
People at work tell me all the time. They're like, dude, you should just shave. I'm like, I've had this. Like, there's people that I've been working with people for 6 years at my current job that they've never seen me without a beard. My daughters have never seen me without a beard. So that's what it is. And so this is the Nick Beard and Me podcast. Thanks for listening. And that's going to do it. Thanks so much. You guys have a good night.
Night.